Imagine yourself lying in bed one night trying to sleep, when you're suddenly overcome by a feeling that something is very wrong. And looking up at the ceiling, your worst fears are confirmed. An unwelcome guest has invaded your room. A bug. Now, you can tell it's at least some sort of creepy crawly by the way it looks, but you're not exactly sure what kind. And the only thing you can do is hope to sweet Neptune that it doesn't come flying like a bat out of hell straight at your face. After all, while most people might not be able to identify for certain which insect it was at first glance, we do know that generally speaking, many insects can fly, and so we prepare ourselves for that terrible possibility. On the flip side though, you'll never worry about a dog or horse flying, because they just don't. But there are a few animals out there that you would think would stay beholden to gravity and rooted to the ground given what they are, but in reality might have actually solved the secret of flight, being an animal you would never expect to suddenly fly or glide at you out of nowhere. And one animal that I regret to inform you is a part of this exclusive club is a creature usually much more problematic than bugs: snakes. Thankfully for now, the issue is contained to the dense jungles and forests of Southeast Asia, where if you peer at the sky, you might just spot a Chrysopolia, a genus of snakes which are better known to the locals as the flying or gliding snake. Now, I was sincerely bummed to learn that serpents have mastered flight, and I mean this literally, as that's exactly what they've done, mastered it. As the Chrysopolia isn't just your average gliding animal, it's darn near the best one out there, with studies finding it to be capable of flights greater than what any other gliding animal can muster, -2. And current estimates find that each flight it embarks on can last up to 100 meters or 330 feet, which is crazily impressive, especially when you remember that snakes don't have limbs, wings, or even anything that begins to look like a wing. So how do they do it? Well, it starts with a tree, which acts as the snake's runway, or rather, helipad, as the snake doesn't actually need speed to take off like a plane. Instead, once it knows where it wants to go, it will simply take on a J-shaped pose that allows it to utilize powerful muscles located in the tail to propel itself up and away. But yeeting its body off of a branch is only one piece of the puzzle. The second piece is only seen in flight, where it does something almost surreal. It changes shape. To be exact, first the Chrysopolia will suck in its abdomen, flattening its body out and increasing surface area, before splaying its ribs out and hyperflexing them into a C shape. Then, finally to generate propulsion, it will do what snakes do best: slither. Because as it turns out, undulating is pretty good for flying if you have the right aerodynamics. And with this tactic, flying snakes can travel up to 11 meters or 33 feet per second, which, just to put that into perspective, is almost as fast as Usain Bolt's top speed. So in other words, you're not outrunning them. Oh, and if they couldn't be any scarier, you might want to know they are venomous too. But I will say that thankfully these guys are ultimately not regarded as a threat to humans, as they are pretty small as far as snakes go, and while they do have venom, which is certainly not ideal to be bitten with, it is relatively mild to fully grown people. Not to mention that given the size of their teeth, they have a hard time biting anything large in the first place, rendering them pretty much solely dangerous to small creatures, which in their case usually is rodents, frogs, lizards, birds, and bats. Although truthfully, I think one could do more than enough damage if it simply flew into me by means of a heart attack. But I digress. And ironically, it is one of the things that they hunt that has also become another unexpected flyer. And that's frogs, who have actually made a lot more progress in this field than serpents, as today there are more than 380 known species of flying frogs throughout the world, with a particular major concentration being located in South America. Now, this group is not to be confused with the parachute frogs, which is a whole other group that can descend via air, but only at angles greater than 45 degrees. Meanwhile, our guys, the true flying frogs, can do that and much more, being able to glide at angles greater and less than 45 degrees. And funnily enough, they have achieved this by using something typically associated with swimming: their webbed feet. While most frogs do have some degree of webbing on their feet, flying frogs have taken it to a whole other level, possessing webbing much more extensive than what's normally seen, and having them on all feet, and therefore increasing the total surface area. And this is really their secret to flight, as it allows the frog to catch some righteous air and drift along. But actually, when I say secret, I only really meant one of them, as there is another: their skin. Compared to others of their kind, flying frog skin is much more, well, loosey-goosey, you could say, especially around the abdomen, allowing them to trap air better and giving some species, like the Wallace flying frog, the ability to glide for over 20 meters or 65 feet. And this might sound a lot less impressive than what snakes have achieved, but you have to remember, this distance is crazy when you take into account how teeny tiny frogs usually are. And another way to think about this is that it'd be like if a person was able to fly for over 1,000 feet or 330 meters with simply their hands, feet, and skin. Pretty wild. And similarly to flying snakes, it is believed that with this great power, frogs have become terrorizing overlords over their prey. In this case, insects, other invertebrates, and occasionally toads and very small birds. However, flying frogs have also figured out that flying isn't just good for killing, but also fleeing, as they have often been recorded to take flight in order to break the ankles of their would-be predators, mainly snakes. And yes, I know they have no ankles. And as fate would have it, these snakes also include the flying snake itself, or at least theoretically, as certain flying frogs do share the same habitat as Chrysopolia, meaning that aerial dogfights between frogs and snakes is in fact a very real possibility, though sadly one that's yet to be filmed. You also don't have to really worry as much about these guys landing on top of you as snakes, as frogs with this ability seldom, if ever, leave the safety of trees, preferring to leave the ground floor to us Oompa Loompas. But one creature that is more than happy to share the floor with us is another one of those animals you're probably going to be upset to hear flies, and that's spiders. And actually, it's turned out that spiders have been airborne for a very long time, possibly since the Cretaceous period. And while we might be used to these arachnids being able to jump at us, I really don't think anyone was expecting them to fly, which in their case is seen during a process known as ballooning, wherein a spider will climb up to the highest point it can and then release its spider silk into the air, using it to catch an air current that can take it up and away, almost becoming in a sense both the kite flyer and the kite itself. And because spiders that balloon are usually so gosh darn small, as in weighing 1 milligram or under, it turns out that they can also literally ride electricity, or rather electric fields that produce enough force, making them in some sense closer to Electro than Spider-Man. However, before you let out a sigh of relief, considering its size, I should probably let you know that spiders up to 100 times bigger have also been observed ballooning as well. And that's just observed. Who knows how big ballooning spiders can get? And despite not having any true flying appendages, spiders are deceptively effective and impressive at flying, even outcompeting virtually all non-birds and bats in some sense, as they're capable of long journeys that vary from as small as a few meters to as long as hundreds of miles or kilometers, perhaps even over 1,000. And many sailors have reported spiders landing on their boats, even far out at sea. And it's not just horizontal distance they've got down, but vertical too, with specimens being collected by actual balloons as high up as 5 kilometers or 16,000 feet, 5 times greater than the usual height undertaken by commercial hot air balloons. And during these trips, spiders are even known to sometimes hop on the literal jet stream, resulting in journeys that can last up to 25 days, during which they can survive without food or water. Almost seems too good to be true, but there is in fact a catch-22, which is that ballooning is actually very dangerous for spiders, since ultimately they catch a ride, not drive the ride. And therefore when they balloon, they just gotta hope to the dear heavens, pun intended, that everything goes smoothly, having no control over where they are taken or what happens in the air, resulting in many dying from landing in unfortunate locations, or being sniped midair by predators. Yet in the end, the reward and opportunity seemingly outweighs the risk, as they can use ballooning to 1. Find new areas to populate, 2. Invade remote and hard-to-access regions, and 3. In the case of the younglings, disperse. And while most of us would probably say we've never seen a flying spider before, the prevalence of airborne arachnids is actually much greater than you'd first think, with one study even finding that 1 in 17 of all invertebrates floating in the air as we speak is a spider, beating out the usual suspects like flies, bees, butterflies, moths, and wasps. So next time you find a spider on you and you're wondering how on earth it got there, consider the possibility of flight. But if you thought flying spiders was shocking, just wait until you hear about Squidward. Yeah, that's right. There are flying squids. Now, I'm not exactly sure why, but I would never consider squids to be a top candidate for flight school. And yet here we are, because they do actually exist. And it's not even just 1 or 2 species, there is literally an entire family of squids, universally referred to as the flying squids. And that is the Omastrophidae, a group made up of 11 different genera and over 20 species, who greatly vary in size. But despite varying in size, all members are known to leap out of the water, and are often individually nicknamed flying something. But technically speaking, it's really only an elite handful of them that have actually achieved impressive aerial capabilities, with the best known among this more exclusive group being species such as the purpleback and Japanese flying squid, the latter of which is capable of not only launching itself out of the water, but also staying above the surface for up to 100 feet or 30 meters, all the while sustaining extremely fast speeds, earning them the additional nickname as the ocean's fighter jets. Pretty cool. But it's not just the speed that has got them compared to human technology, but also their flying technique, as flying squids are literally the only animals on Earth that fly or glide using something that jets and planes do. And that's surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly given the name, jet propulsion. Yep, just like planes, these guys rely on propulsion through the backward ejection of a high-speed gas or liquid, in this case water. And this does wonders for their flying ability. But it's not just this so-called advanced tech, which is their only useful tool. Because while that is a big part of their success, there is another factor at work, which requires taking a good look at their tentacles. Because if you do, you might then notice that when in flight, there is actually a thin membrane that connects their tentacles together, transforming them into something of a wing, while their terminal fins are also relatively larger than what's typically seen in other cephalopods, adding just some more additional lift. And so with all this combined, flying squids have nearly got the whole package, which they use, like flying frogs, in order to escape from predators. But then, more similarly to flying spiders, the quote-unquote prevalence of their flights is actually likely greater than you'd ever imagine, as collectively, these squids are among the most widespread groups. And even one species alone, the elite Japanese flying squid, makes up half of the world's entire annual cephalopod catch. So sadly, the one thing these jets cannot outmaneuver is us. But they're not total victims, as they themselves are also successful predators, being in general powerful swimmers and possessing sharp teeth, but on their tentacles and arms of all things, which they use to grasp prey and usher them straight into their waiting beaks. Pretty metal. And though not as hardcore, there is another unlikely flyer which may just take the cake as far as being fantastical, and I mean that literally. First, picture a dragon. You've got a reptile with 4 legs, a tail, a head, and then most importantly, 2 wings. Now, what if I told you that there's a real animal that checks all of these marks? Well, if you see my videos on Extinct Zoo, then you might say I'm talking about the Vigeltosauridae, an extinct family of gliding reptiles who dominated the skies during the late Permian. But I'm not talking about them. In reality, I'm talking about a very much alive creature known as the Draco. And no, I'm not kidding. That's actually its real scientific name. But it's more commonly known as the flying lizard, or dragon. Like the aerial snakes, the Draco is known only to Southeast Asia. Must be something in the water, or perhaps the air there. And they are fairly common within forests, areca gardens, teak plantations, and shrub jungle. And just like the mythical dragons, these lizards have achieved flight, or partial gliding, through 2 wings. Yet theirs are not modified arms or separate attachments, but rather, they fly with their ribs. To be more exact, the Draco lizard has specialized elongated thoracic ribs that act as a support structure for a thin membrane of excess skin, which covers them. And thanks to some particularly good muscle control, these guys are able to flap that up and down, as their ribs are not immobile like ours. They can also fold them into the side of their body, or extend them when they're about to fly. Then on top of that, their back legs also seem to play an important role in the gliding process, as once these guys take a leap and enter fly mode, they assume a position wherein the back legs form a cross section, allowing for just a tad more lift. And together, all these traits have transformed the Draco into one of the greatest gliding machines from an efficiency standpoint, with individuals having been known to fly for over 60 meters or 100 feet across, while only losing 1/6 of their cruising altitude doing so, leading many to believe that if you threw one off something high enough, they could go much farther than what's currently recorded. Additionally, their impressive stats also make them the reigning champs of flight-to-body ratio when you focus on vertebrates, with most Dracos being capable of journeys that are 1,000 times greater than their body length if they start flight from 10 meters or 33 feet up. In other words, if humans could do that, then it would kind of be like jumping off of this and then not touching the ground for over 1 mile. Now, you might be wondering at this point, why do these lizards need such efficient gliding powers? And besides from the fact that it makes them look like little dragons, which is always an added benefit, they fly for very similar reasons as the frogs, i.e., pesky snakes like to snack on our little dragon when they get a chance, leading to flight being one highly effective escape method. But there is also another reason why they need to be good at flying, which might sound super obvious, and that's travel. You see, Dracos are considered by some to be the only non-bird reptiles who primarily get around by flight instead of walking. And since they live in trees, they virtually never touch the ground, just moving instead from tree to tree, using their extremely unique adaptations. In fact, even when you include them walking up and down a tree, it's still thought that 80% of their traveling distance through life comes from flight. And so, with such impressive capabilities, it might not be surprising to hear that these are not the only lizards who have some flying capabilities within the animal kingdom, as we also have the Tychozun as well, whose nickname is the parachute gecko. In comparison to the Draco, these guys actually took a much different route in order to achieve gliding prowess, as instead of a few specialized body parts, they took a general approach with their entire bodies supporting overgrowths and flaps, that as a whole give it enough surface area to be able to glide for some time once leaping off of trees, being somewhat similar to the Draco in terms of max distance, but not quite as efficient. Additionally, while gliding can be used by them to get around, it is also not considered their primary mode of travel, unlike our little dragons, and is more often used for something that seems to be a common denominator among these animals: avoiding predation. So in other words, who knows? Maybe if humans had kept getting picked on instead of becoming apex predators, maybe it'd be us instead featured in a video about animals you didn't expect to fly. And speaking of animals with feats you wouldn't expect, there is one animal that is perhaps the most feared creature in the entirety of North America, despite not looking that formidable. If that sounds interesting, check out the video I made on that. Anyways, thanks for watching, and until next time on Living Zoo.